Leaders need to set and share a vision with their teams. Leaders need to ensure that we are all seeing future opportunities through the same lens. My guest today on The Leader's Perspective has built his career around vision.
Welcome to the Leader's Perspective Podcast. Where we talk to triple threat leaders about the people, products, trends, and experiences that influence business. I'm now pleased to introduce your host, Jason Goldberg.
Welcome back to the Leader's Perspective podcast, where we engage with triple threat leaders to learn about their lives, careers, and leadership philosophies, and have the opportunity to discuss a hot topic in society. As a reminder, a triple threat leader is one who embodies the very best of leadership and who has strong IQ, EQ, and DQ, intelligence quotient, emotional quotient, and decency quotient. I'm so excited to welcome to the show Monty Montoya, the CEO of TherOptix. I said in the intro that Monty focuses his career on vision. He is an expert and leader in the world of corneal therapeutics, products, and transplants, and has developed some of the leading products that have restored sight for hundreds of thousands of people worldwide. Prior to his current role, Monty served as the founder and CEO of CorneaGen, a venture-backed biotech company. He was founder of Orion Biotech, a spin-out from CorneaGen. Previously, he was president and CEO of SightLife, and earlier in his career, he was CEO of the Northwest Lions Eye Bank. He is also the advisory board chair of Life Center Northwest, an organ procurement organization serving the Pacific Northwest, and a board member of the Holland Foundation for Sight Restoration. And I'm very pleased to say that Monty was a classmate of mine from the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. I am very pleased to welcome to the Leader's Perspective, Monty Montoya. So welcome, Monty. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Jason. Really great to be here with you and have some time to catch up.
Absolutely. It's been a long time. I can't believe we graduated 19 years ago.
It is really hard to imagine that 20 years ago we were together at Duke, and almost 20 years, I guess. Next year will be our 20-year anniversary. But what a great 2 decades it's been, and it's been fun to follow along with your career and see how you progressed, and just such a great cohort of human beings making a lot of impact around the world.
It's amazing. I tell people that the class that we were in had such an incredible global presence, and a lot of what people are doing are truly mission driven, and you are absolutely leading the pack in terms of mission driven roles. So very impressive. So why don't we jump right in to that, right? Tell our listeners about you. Where are you from? What are your hobbies? A little bit about Monty.
Yeah, so I actually grew up in a small rural town called Rimrock in Arizona. A lot of people would know where Sedona is. I would say we're kind of the south side of Sedona. The farmers and the workers live in Rimrock. My dad was the kind of the caretaker of the elementary school I went to, Beaver Creek Elementary. And when I graduated from Camp Verde High School, that was the larger town next to Rimrock that I had to bus over to. I think I had 68 kids in my graduating class, so kind of a small town upbringing. And I went from there to the kind of exact opposite when I went to Arizona State University for my undergrad. I think at the time there was, it was the third largest university in the country, and so went from the small town environment to just explosion of people and all kinds of experiences. And it has been a great experience for me to come from that background where hard work and sweat on your brow is kind of what defines you to post our Duke MBA education, having an opportunity to be a part of things that really can help shape the world and make the world a better place. And hobbies that I've developed over time really kind of revolve around culture and people. I have just really enjoyed, through my having worked in 30 plus different countries and getting to know amazing people of all different cultures and backgrounds and religions, and just seeing the good in humanity, across our planet has been really a great experience for me. One of the things that I sort of brought along from my childhood is golf. That's a hobby I have to this day. I'm still
Right.
sort of an average golfer, but my grandfather taught me how to play, and I grew up playing in the Beaver Creek Country Club, which unfortunately is closed today, waiting for somebody to buy it. So if you're out there and you're looking for a fantastic project and want to really revive a community, look up the Beaver Creek Country Club. It's for sale.
Nice.
But again, something that I've developed over the last probably 20 years here in the Seattle area, where I call home, is an interest in understanding of wine and the winemaking process. And that kind of I fell into that probably because of my love of culture and people. And I made a friend here who ended up starting a winery and needed
Wow.
grunt labor. And so for the past 16 years, actually 18 years now, his first vintage was 2004. Have been helping my friend Chris Sparkman of Sparkman Cellars in every aspect of winemaking, just as again, grunt labor and helping out wherever it needed to be helped. And I've learned a lot, and just grown to appreciate that whole process of winemaking, the business side of it as well.
Maybe it's a retirement gig for you.
It really could be. I just enjoy it. I mean, from the farmers, which is part of what I grew up with, who grow the grapes, all through the process, and then ultimately, it's kind of crazy sales and marketing process as well that drives that whole business. And so there's a lot to learn there, and fun people along the way as well.
Very cool. Very cool. So you went to ASU, and how did you find your way? What did you study?
So I started out as a bioengineering major there. Truth be told, I flunked out of the engineering part of the whole process and defaulted to just getting a basic biological sciences degree.
Okay.
I, along the way, thought about going to medical school, but early on, thanks to some good mentors, realized I was either going to be a good doctor and a bad husband and father, or a good husband and father and a bad doctor, and kind of was self-aware enough to realize that was not a good set of choices. And so ultimately that led me into the biotech healthcare field, where in college, undergrad, I actually worked in the summers for W.L. Gore in their medical research facility in Flagstaff, Arizona. And then that ultimately set me up for what became my career, and kind of full-time job, and ultimately a passion of eliminating corneal blindness.
Love that. So that's a great transition. Tell us about corneal blindness, right? I think, it's probably, not something that most people face. It's something that, clearly people don't want, when they hear that they have some type of corneal injury or disease, it's a frightening time. So how many people does this impact? And tell us about the field a little bit.
Yeah, well, it's kind of interesting. So when you look into somebody's eye and you see the colored part of their eye, there's a clear layer of tissue that covers over that colored part of your eye, and that's the cornea. It's basically the window of your eye. It's what allows light to pass in and for you to actually see. Also, the shape of that tissue, that clear layer of tissue, refracts the light so that it ends up on your retina and allows you to have focus and be able to see. And so it's a critical part of your vision. Today, there are about 12.7 million people worldwide who are cornea blind in at least one of their eyes. Wow. And unfortunately, right now, there's not a treatment or a pathway where all those people could be put in a situation where their sight was restored. And there are genetic forms of corneal blindness, and then you can imagine a whole set of injuries or infections. Anything that affects the front of your eye can cause your cornea to become misshaped, which then the light doesn't focus properly, or cloudy from infection so that the light can't pass through. And so, either diseases, injuries, or infections are what cause people to go corneal blind. And the predominant majority of those people actually live in lower middle income countries. And so that's where finding sustainable and scalable solutions to corneal blindness has been a challenge. And I feel really great at this point in my career over the past 2 decades especially. We've really elevated corneal blindness to a point where industry is starting to take interest and really ramping up the innovation. So my hope is that over time we will reach that goal of eliminating corneal blindness by the year 2040. So it's a strategy that a mission that we laid out at SightLife, a company I was at, and to really make that happen and have that goal of 2040. And it's starting, the flywheel's starting to spin faster and faster. So I'm still hopeful we can meet that goal.
And how many people need a corneal transplant in the U.S. Every year?
Yeah, so every year it's around 50,000 people who need cornea transplants. That's a pretty static number. I think the growth and need for cornea transplants is flat. Maybe single digit growth. Fortunately, here in the U.S., because of organizations like SightLife and CorneaGen that I was previously at, we actually have a surplus of tissue available for transplant here in the U.S.
Amazing. Okay.
Which is fantastic if you're here in the U.S. Unfortunately, pretty much every other country around the world has a shortage. And the reality is globally, we produce probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 corneas for transplant, where you probably need 2 million a year to just keep up with the new cases of corneal blindness that come on. And then when you think of that 12.7 million number, you realize that we've got to do some things differently to scale access to care and treatments that can help restore these people's vision.
So corneal tissue and transplants is just a piece of this, right? What are the other aspects of your world?
Yeah, well, one of the great programs that was launched at SightLife was really early treatment of corneal abrasions. And so, if you've ever had an experience where you scratch you think you scratch your eye, well, you're scratching your cornea, very painful. And in most cases, if you bathe daily or wash your face regularly, you won't have any problem. It'll be painful for a while, and in a day or two it'll heal and you'll be fine. In a developing world situation where you may not have the ability to bathe with clean water or wash your face with clean water, that scratch on your cornea can very quickly lead to an infection. And so one of the things that they've been doing at SightLife is training community health workers. In most cases, these are women who are trained how to identify a corneal abrasion and treat it with an antibiotic so that it heals quickly. And this sort of just prevents a whole load of corneal blindness from happening. So being on that prevention side is another part of what's happening out there. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, Orion Biotech, another company that I helped found, has been able to develop a product where we can take cells from a donor cornea, multiply those cells so that one donor cornea can actually provide transplants for over 100 people. I think really it's probably going to be closer to 1,000 people from one donor cornea. And so this really solves the shortage problem. And these cells are delivered via an injection into the what's called the anterior chamber of your eye, just behind the cornea. And so that's another mode of treatment that I think is going to have a huge impact. And
the cornea regenerates, correct?
That's a great question. And the answer is yes and no. So the cornea actually has many different cell types in it. There's layers of cells. Mm-hmm. The outer layer of cells is called the epithelium. The epithelium continually regenerates, and as you're blinking or whatever, you're removing the old epithelial cells and the newer cells come forward. And so that process is continually working. And there's a segment of corneal blindness we're working on at the Holland Foundation, which is a nonprofit I'm affiliated with, where patients actually are unable to regenerate new epithelial cells, and they develop very severe, painful, what are called ocular surface disorders.
Mm-hmm.
But on the back of the cornea, you have what's called the endothelium, and that's a single layer of cells, and those cells do not regenerate. And so there are genetic disorders like Fuchs dystrophy or other injuries that can actually damage those cells, and they don't regenerate. And the primary function of those cells is to pump fluid out of your cornea, so it stays compact and clear. And when your cornea swells, it actually becomes cloudy. And so the endothelial cells are really critical, but they don't regenerate. And one of the most common forms of transplant is replacing that inner layer of cells with donor tissue.
Very cool. I mean, I shared with you when we spoke last week that I was about 7 years ago. I had a corneal injury to my right eye, and it was, I've had orthopedic injuries and other injuries, and I can attest that the corneal injury was by far the most frightening and the most painful injury that I have ever experienced. And, just in addition to the pain, the panic, the fear that this causes when somebody is potentially losing their sight in the eye is significant. So having therapeutics that can restore sight is amazing. And obviously, mine wasn't as severe. It regenerated. And as you mentioned earlier, mine actually regenerated and changed the shape of the cornea. So therefore, I landed myself with glasses after that. But from a pure, this is not just physical. This is also psychological. It has a massive psychological component to what you do.
It really does. It just reminded me. Some of these things I get a little choked up thinking about them, remembering. But I just flash back to this conversation. I was in Nairobi, Kenya, sitting across from a cab driver who had a corneal abrasion, turned into an infection, and through that whole process, he was a driver. He lost his job. He couldn't support his family. His wife and his kids left to go back with her family because they couldn't support him, and he was sort of a drain to them. And he's sitting across from us basically saying, can you please help me? Because if you can't, I'm just going to kill myself. Because life is not worth living if I can't see. And so the reality of blindness across the globe is pretty weighty, and the psychological impacts that it has on the person who's blind, but then also the ripple effect out on all the people who are around them is pretty amazing. And it's it really impacted me when the first time I went to the WHO in Geneva. Of all the things they can have, out in front of the WHO headquarters is a large statue of a blind man holding onto a stick, and a young boy is holding on to the other end of it. And it's basically this thing that captures the impact of health ailments, and they use blindness as the one because the elderly man is blind, and so this child has been charged to take care of him, and he follows the child around. Well, that child's not going to school. And so that future of that person, that child, basically is changed, probably not for the better, because there are now two people who are affected, and probably more by this blindness.
Very cool. It's amazing. So tell me about, you started to tell me in our prep session about some technology that you're developing that allows for medications to be distributed through a lens.
Yeah, so I'm currently leading a startup company called TherOptix, and we are working on bringing to market technology that was developed at the Langer Lab at MIT in partnership with Boston Children's Hospital and Mass Eye and Ear, where we can take drugs, put them in a polymer, embed that polymer inside of a contact lens, that then can deliver drugs after ophthalmic surgical procedures in a very controlled manner. So you have, more precise dosing over the desired time period that you want to deliver that. And this could really change the trajectory of post-surgical care in ophthalmology. Right now, if many people out there have had cataract surgery, for example, and so after cataract surgery, you're sent home with drops, and you have to put these drops in your eye. And the drops, when in your eyes, are very effective, but it's hard to get them in, especially if you're, let's say 70 or 80 years old after a cataract surgery. That's kind of hard to do. And so there are a significant amount of post-surgical complications across ophthalmology. And so by having this contact lens on the cornea, delivering a drug at a controlled way, can really help eliminate, some of those challenges that we see post-surgically. The first product that we're working on, which you would have loved to have, Jason, when you had your corneal abrasion, is for corneal pain. And so there are procedures like PRK or corneal cross-linking where, in order to do the procedure, the surgeon has to remove that epithelial layer of tissue, and so the eye is exposed; those nerve endings are exposed, to the air, which actually creates a lot of pain. And so by putting on a TherOptix lens that actually has an analgesic in the lens, we can take care of that pain problem for those patients while their epithelial layer regrows. It usually takes 2 to 3 days for that to happen. Right now, it's kind of amazing that the primary way that doctors are dealing with this post-surgical pain and PRK especially is by prescribing opioids.
Yep.
And, there's been studies done at some of the top ophthalmology centers in the country where actually cornea surgeons who are providing large volumes of PRK surgery are some of the highest prescribers in the system.
Amazing.
Of opioids.
And we all know the whole host of problems that lead from that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So how did you come up with this idea?
Well, I have to give credit to the founders of TherOptix, Dan Kahani, who is at Boston Children's and MIT. He's actually has his section in the Langer Lab and at MIT, and Joe Cialino, who is a corneal surgeon at Mass Eye and Ear. Those two really are the founders of this whole idea, and over the last 10 plus years, they've been doing academic work that ultimately led to a patent. The patent that they were able to secure is for any drug encapsulated in a contact lens, so a very powerful and broad patent. Wow. And then just this concept, and so those two were really the key. My role came in once TherOptix had licensed that intellectual property from MIT, Boston Children's, and Mass Eye and Ear, was to come in, do the tech transfer, and get a product that ultimately can make it through FDA approval, and most importantly, really serve patients and surgeons in a powerful way.
Acell Advisors expert consultants are all veteran operators who bring real solutions to your business challenges. Contact us at info@acell-advisors.com to reach our experts today.
Let's pivot,
Okay.
and let's talk a little bit about your leadership style and philosophies. You've led very large teams across your organizations. How do you set clear vision and strategy for your teams?
I think one of the key things in all of that for me has been really identifying those big, hairy, audacious goals, kind of working really, really diligently to refine what that is, and then frame it into something that's specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. Kind of the SMART goal. For example, at SightLife, we developed a vision / mission statement that went. I still know it to this day. We serve as a global leader and partner to eliminate corneal blindness by 2040. And so, we kind of had this very big thing to eliminate corneal blindness. We were very specific about our role to be a leader and a partner. If you see the pictures and hear the stories of the corneal blindness, you know that it's very relevant. And then you had that timely goal of 2040. And then the only question in that was, is it attainable? Can we really make this happen? And that mission statement really served as a catalyst and a framing for all of what SightLife has done over the last 12 years and still going forward. And so I think, again, having that big, hairy, audacious goal is part of it. But then I think important to that is you have to have strategies that are, let's say, yearly, but also 3 to 5 year strategies that are serving that statement. And so what do we need to be doing today? That those 1 or 2 really critical things that have to happen this year for us to make the appropriate progress towards that goal. And so making sure that that's clear across the entire organization and making sure everybody understands what they do on a daily basis to serve those strategies.
Right. Excellent. Today's workforce is, seemingly burnt out. All of the companies that I talk to are having a difficult time, whether people are working from home or have a hybrid arrangement. Some people seem to be working more hours than ever, even though they seem to have more flexibility. What have you done with your teams to be able to combat fatigue and improve morale and retention?
Yeah, I think this is an area where we're still learning, across the business landscape of how to manage this. And I think this combination of the pandemic and this access to technology that allows us to work from anywhere has, in some ways, provided short-term productivity. But this issue of burnout is much, much bigger, I think, than we realize. And so one of the things that I've been practicing really for the last 10 plus years is a concept I call NATO, and it's no access time off. And so in this process, I was the first one to do it myself. Fortunately, I had a board chair, 10 plus years ago. Her name was Diane Sabin, and she was a former CPA and CFO, and she thought it would be good periodically for the CEO to be on vacation and to not have access to anything in the organization, just as a way to check for fraud and redundancy in the organization. And so her purpose for that was more kind of from a CPA audit compliance perspective. But what I learned when I took time off and I was unplugged from the network, I couldn't log into my email because they changed my password, I actually had a lot better experience. I came back even more refreshed. But I still had one problem in that is that I came back to this pile of emails. And so all that, sort of refreshing I had gained kind of dissipated very quickly because I'm trying to catch up and dig out from under this mountain of emails. So in the no access time off process, I ultimately developed for myself and then began to push down into the organization. When you had a vacation, I really encourage people to take at least a week and if possible 2 weeks a year where you're completely unplugged from the network. And for most hard chargers, type A people like you and I, Jason, and probably the people listening to this, you have to change their password because we can't help ourselves. We'll still try to access it.
Sure.
When our spouse is off to the store and we're on vacation, we're checking to see if there's anything we missed. But so changing the password so you can't get in at all. And then here's the big one that really made a difference for me. That out of office message that informs people that you will never read the emails that they send you during this time period. And that if they need to contact somebody in the organization, here's who they can contact. Or if they need to contact you, this is when you'll be back and resend the email then. And while you're gone, all of those emails are completely deleted. And so when you come back from your time off, you have 0 emails in your inbox. And that has been something that I have found to really help refresh people and kind of change perspectives when, just having that time off to get your brain rested and your mind rested. I feel like it's really promoted the creativity of our key leadership. It's definitely been a great tool in retention of keeping people. And I'll tell you, some of the people that'll fight this the most are your salespeople.
Right.
They can't imagine being away and not being able to resolve problems, but they're the ones that probably need as much as anybody.
It's amazing to hear a leader not just do this themselves, encourage it for other people, no matter the function in the organization. And obviously it's scary, right? It's a massive sea shift in people thinking about this. But I know that when employees return from vacation and they find dozens, if not hundreds, of emails waiting for them, it negates the entire purpose of that vacation. They come back, they're underwater, they're overwhelmed. Undoubtedly, people check their emails either during vacation or right before they come back just so that they can catch up. And this is just an absolutely phenomenal idea that other leaders can implement and should encourage.
I mean, people who are listening to this probably can feel that anxiety.
I felt it when you were talking about it.
2 days before my vacation is over, I'm like, oh gosh, I know I'm going to have thousands of emails or hundreds of emails that I'm going to have to deal with. And
absolutely.
I'm just going to start working on them now.
So last thing I wanted to chat with you about, in this market, how are you recruiting high-performing talent?
One of the things that, it's funny, there's, some of these things that we benefited from our time at Duke. We had some great leaders and professors there. And one of the things we worked a fair amount with, remember Sim Sitkin and
Alan Lind.
Alan Lind, yep, is culture and how to build culture. And one of the things that stuck for me and I was able to develop is, it's not just having values in the company. Those are really important.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't define the behaviors that animate those values in your company, it's really hard to know what you're recruiting for.
Yep.
And so one of the things that I've done at my companies is put a lot of time and effort in understanding, not just from my perspective, but the company itself. How do we define top performers? What are the behaviors those individuals exhibit? And so, for example, one of the values at SightLife was passion, and we went through identifying what are those, what does passion look like at SightLife? And one of the funny things that came up is you're willing to pitch in help whenever it's needed. Nobody has to ask you. It's just you just step in.
Yeah.
And once we identified that, it was really funny to watch. If somebody, like the one thing you never said at SightLife was, "That's not my job." If you said that, like everybody just would kind of take a step back and be like, "Okay, this person doesn't belong here."
Right.
And so what we began doing is actually codifying the questions in our interview process, looking for those behaviors in potential candidates. And so finding people who were already doing those behaviors wherever they were at and then bringing them into the organization. And actually, we many times were more focused on, does this person have the right behaviors? We'll teach them how to do what they need to do. We'll train them up on whatever the details of their job are. But if they have the behavioral / cultural fit, we can make them work.
Absolutely. I completely agree. I was chatting with somebody this morning about it. I was asked, how do you build high-performing teams, and what do you look for? And it is somewhat amorphous, right? And so I explained some of the technical characteristics, but I also explained a persona of somebody being both a helper and a problem solver and being intellectually curious. Because if you're a helper, you're a problem solver, and you're intellectually curious, you don't care if the issue or problem to be solved or work to be done is within your realm, or if it's over in a completely different area and you're just excited to help somebody else for the greater good.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that's really hard, and I've struggled with this. I just thought of at Corneagen, we got to a point where we needed to hire a new chief commercial officer, and I was able to recruit in somebody that the investors and the board really had high esteem for. They thought, well, this person is fantastic. We can't believe you've recruited them in. And in the onboarding process, this individual basically got kicked out of the process. And day one, it was patently clear that this person did not fit our culture. At the same time, I knew I had investors and board members that, just thought this person was perfect and they were going to, be everything we needed. And so I'm in this situation. Do I honor the culture or do I protect my own backside with my board and investors? And to do the right thing, ultimately, I had to let that person go. And we had a very amicable conversation where we both realized, hey, this is not a good fit.
Right.
And let's call it now. Allow you to move on and allow us to move on and do it in an amicable way. And so we were able to do that. But I have to admit, it was a little scary as a CEO because I wasn't sure how the board and the investors would handle it. But I think ultimately everybody was pretty pleased to see that the culture was that strong that, right away, even though this highly regarded, highly touted, brilliant person, very, very accomplished, they just didn't fit. And that was identified quickly.
You have to protect that at all costs. So, Monty, I want to thank you again. This has been an amazing conversation. I've learned a lot about your field. I know the listeners, I'm sure, have learned quite a bit, and certainly, and probably even more importantly, learning from your leadership style and some of the unique things that you've brought to your companies and your industry. And I know that the leaders and aspiring leaders listening in will learn from that, and I'm pretty sure we're going to see NATO implemented around. So when we start seeing NATO all around, we're going to attribute that to you.
I love to see that, just for the benefit of humanity, for people to have that mental, physical, emotional health through that process. It'd be great.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Jason. Fun to be here.
Well, that was an absolutely amazing conversation with Monty, and I personally absolutely loved hearing about all of the exciting things that he is working on and in the corneal space, and absolutely appreciate that somebody like Monty, a leader like Monty, has dedicated his life and his career to restoring sight for millions of people. So at the end of every podcast, we recap with the three main things that we learned from our triple threat leader of the day. And I noted down three things that I learned from Monty. The first one is around goals and vision. We need to set big, hairy, audacious goals, otherwise known as BHAG. And it's not enough to tie those big, hairy, audacious goals, or at least set those big, hairy, audacious goals on their own. We have to tie them to SMART goals. And SMART goals stand for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. So we take those big goals, we tie them to SMART goals, we then set a timeline for those on both short and medium-term objectives, and then we need to make it personal. What does that mean for each individual in each role? Second thing I learned from Monty is his philosophy on NATO, no access time off, which I think is an absolutely incredible philosophy and is wonderful thing to do for your employees. It's to make sure that your employees aren't overwhelmed during or after a vacation. Time off is time off. Time off is meant to be spent recharging those batteries, coming back to work full steam ahead. And when we stare down the barrel of a full inbox that's waiting for us when we come back, it negates all of that time off. So lock down email, delete the emails, refer to other people on the team who are not on vacation, and let that employee come back to a clean slate, moving at full speed ahead as soon as they come back. So NATO was an absolutely fantastic leadership idea from Monty. And the third is around hiring, and Monty suggested that we need to define behaviors that animate culture and values. I think that's really powerful. We have to define our culture, we have to define the behaviors, and once we do that, and we're recruiting, we look for people who support one another. And if you do those things, you can often recruit into high-performing teams. So once again, I want to thank you for listening to the Leader's Perspective podcast. As always, have a great day and be your best self.
Thanks for listening to the Leader's Perspective podcast, brought to you by Accel Advisors. Visit accel-advisors.com for more information about our growth, turnaround, optimization, risk, and HR advisory services.
The Leader's Perspective is produced by Accel Advisors, LLC.
And is available on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify.